I.F.O. by Conway Fitzgerald. Chapter 6. Early the next morning, McVale's pager went off. His dusty cell phone had rung incessantly, while in silent mode. When he came to, he listened to his very surprising messages.
You have 2 new messages.
McVale, this is Dino at Records. Listen, I've run the name and one match came up with all kinds of bells and whistles. I've sent you a secured email link to the sealed report. I've also requested Schultz to authorize you to view it. It'll take some time to get through, though, if this is the same guy. It's a pretty big file. Anyway, I hope it helps.
The message ended. The phone then beeped, and the next one played.
McVale, Schultz here. I want you to look into the current whereabouts of the subject in question, Dr. Funderburk. He should be considered of high interest to this investigation if he truly is in the area. Call with any report, ASAP.
McVale drank several cups of black coffee in a nearby diner as he read through the 80-plus page classified report. He opened the report on his laptop, which had been emailed from the records department. There were documents and memos attached from the National Security Agency and the nuclear lab at Los Alamos, among the many detailed reports from the Department of Defense. Even the NSA had spent a lot of time and money watching this guy. It seemed Ian had hit the jackpot. After reviewing some of the data, he found that Dr. Funderburk was, at one time, among the top scientists in the Defense Department. His grandfather, Gerhard Funderburk, was one of the rocket scientists working for the Nazis on secret weapons during the war that was captured and subsequently employed by NASA during the space race. Arnold later followed suit, becoming one of the most sought-after minds in aerospace technology and weapons research. He had a big hand in the development of the stealth bomber. A graduate cum laude from Yale at age 16, he had obtained a master's degree in nuclear science before reaching 20. He then completed his education when he obtained a doctorate in astrophysics from Stanford. Though he really wanted to pursue space research, he was then employed by Raytheon at the behest of the Pentagon to pursue their dream of a radar-evading aircraft. Funderburk helped make that dream a reality, and for his hard work, he was granted his request to pursue leadership of the International Particle Acceleration Program. When that was cut in the late 90s, he requested to be released from the DoD, but was denied. His skills were needed for the government's greatest military research objective since the Manhattan Project at Los Alamos, Project Sagittarius, the quest for the antidote for the intercontinental ballistic missile. Though his first initial theories were dismissed during the first Star Wars era of anti-missile theory, his proposal for utilizing accelerated particle beams became of great interest during the years after the Cold War, when the threat of a rogue state firing off a lone nuclear missile became the chief concern of the Pentagon. Soon after, he was employed to lead Project Sagittarius, and again, he requested to be removed. After several denials, his dismissal was finally approved. That was 6 years ago, and the government, despite forcing him to sign the greatest legal gag order of all time, was watching him very closely. When his father died, he had inherited the entirety of the Funderburk estate. When added to the financial success of his own career, he had become an incredibly wealthy man. His own research, whatever he wanted to pursue, would be extremely well funded. The NSA noticed that he had purchased large quantities of expensive heavy metals and chemicals consistent with particle acceleration technology. These resources, along with several other friendly scientists, were invited into his personal research laboratory just outside of Los Chavez. Though his research was legal, he was heavily scrutinized up and until September 11th, 2001, when all eyes turned to the world of international terrorism and illegal aliens. His work had since become of far less significance, until now. After getting wind of McVale's request for information on the man, the details of his assignment regarding the apprehension of UFOs were shared. The newly formed Department of Homeland Security were also on their way to interview the good doctor. McVale was intent on getting there first. Cindy and Lars had to backtrack yet again when they discovered they had re-entered an Indian reservation. They were nearly halfway back to the highway to Los Chavez when Lars slammed on the brakes. A giant dust cloud filled the air.
God damn it! Why do you insist on doing this to me?
He yelled. His forehead was covered in sweat, for even at this early morning hour, the temperature had swelled to 90 degrees.
Give me that.
He grabbed the map out of Cindy's hands and desperately tried to find their location.
This road doesn't even exist.
Yes, it does, Lars. We just have to be persistent. Maybe if you drive slower, we'll see it. He said there was a cutoff right around here, but before the reservation.
The cutoff to Ladron Park was over a mile back, and it wasn't called Ladron Park Highway. There is no such road anywhere on this map. Face it, Sin, it's just another bogus call.
No, it's not,
she said vehemently, snatching back the map.
I asked some of the locals at the bar, and they told me it was right around here. So can you just relax? Take a deep breath or something? Jeez, what's the rush anyway?
She buried her face into the map book, hoping that her confidence was well-founded. Lars looked over to her. Her determination did not bode well for his pursuit for her affections. Somehow he knew that even though he had won the bet, he still wasn't going to win the prize. He put the van into drive and started back towards town.
That's it. We're out of here.
He slammed on the accelerator, and the van screeched back onto the two-lane road.
Lars, stop it! What's the matter with you?
She yelled, with one hand clutching the railing above her window. Lars slammed on the brakes. The car then sat on the side of the road in a cloud of dust. Lars's frustration was more than evident.
Why are you being like this?
Cindy snapped.
Because I know it's not worth it,
he said solemnly.
What's not worth it?
You'll never love me. I'm just kidding myself. This is all just a big mistake. And about the dinner, well, forget it, okay? I don't want any charity dates. If you don't want to be with me, you don't want to be with me. I understand. All I ask is you just stay out of my life. Because it hurts too much, okay?
Cindy was going to say something, but then she stopped. She knew that whatever she was going to say, it had better be well-meaning and sensitive to her friend's feelings. But those words hadn't yet arrived in her mind. She dropped the map, closed her eyes, and grasped her forehead. Lars really believed that not only was there a chance, but that Cindy really was destined to be the love of his life. When she came to his house and begged him to return, and agreed to go to dinner, he felt as though his desperate pleas to God had been answered. Now he felt distant, as though she had created a towering emotional wall between them that hadn't existed before. Last night at the bar, he thought they might have some time together, but all she could do was talk about this FBI agent who came into the bar, how handsome he was. After work, she didn't even spend a minute with him. She went right to bed and asked her mother to set up the couch for him to sleep. In the morning, she referred to him as her friend and coworker when her girls asked about him and why he was at the house. All that and her very distant professional tone in the morning left him with no more emotional fuel. He was truly empty. Cindy spoke very slowly, trying to verbalize her intentions without crushing his ego.
Lars, I've been through a lot over the last year. You know that. And I really don't think I'm ready for any emotional commitments. My life is really hectic right now. The girls are really having a hard time coping with their father leaving. And I'm just doing what I can to keep my family together.
As a tear popped out of Cindy's eye, Lars regretted his outburst and looked over to her for forgiveness. She looked away and tried to cover her sadness, but she couldn't help but cry.
Sin, I'm sorry. I'm a jerk,
said Lars, reaching out his hand. Cindy grasped it and looked back with a smile, tears still filling her eyes.
I'm sorry I was so pushy. You don't have to worry about the bet. That's just me being stupid.
No. A bet's a bet, and you won. Where would you like to go?
They both giggled, happy to use laughter to pervade the uncomfortable silence.
Who's this?
Asked Lars. A large blue truck was slowing as it approached them. The driver rolled down his window and stopped across from them.
You folks lost?
He asked in a very neighborly manner.
Hi, you wouldn't happen to know where to find Ladron Park Highway, by any chance?
Asked Lars, confident the answer would be no.
Why, yes I would. In fact, you're on it. You wouldn't happen to be the news crew I requested?
Oh, Dr. Funderburg?
Asked Cindy, trying to clear the emotions from her face. She leaned over Lars.
Hi there. We're so sorry to be late. We just had a hard time finding you.
That's okay. It's not easy to find me. Why don't you follow me? We're not far.
Lars looked at Cindy in disbelief. She smiled as she returned to her seat.
Well, let's check it out,
she said, sniffling the last of her tears away. They followed Dr. Funderburg's truck about a half-mile down the road until they reached a curve which led to a fenced driveway. The sign on the fence said, "Restricted" and "No trespassing." Another sign beside it said, 1800. The gate retracted automatically, and they continued to follow the doctor's truck across a large barren ranch without cattle. After another couple of miles down the driveway, they saw a large compound, several buildings, and an adjacent house. The truck opened another automatic security gate and entered the driveway of the house.
Where the hell are we?
Asked Lars, a bit surprised by the enormity of the complex. He parked the van behind the doctor's truck.
What is it this guy's going to show us?
I don't know exactly, but it looks like it might be pretty good.
The doctor approached the van on foot, and the two got out.
Hi, Dr. Funderburg. I'm Cindy Turnauer, Action News 8. Oh yeah, I recognize you now. You've been to the Oasis more than once.
Well, it's the only place within 20 miles of here, that's for sure. Sometimes I just need to get out, talk to people. Who's your partner?
Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Funderburg. This is Lars Hamlin. He's my field producer and cameraman. He'll be documenting the discovery today.
I hope you brought a lot of film or video, he said as he offered his hand for a shake. Lars was a bit surprised by that comment.
We should have plenty. I mean, how long is this going to take?
That depends on how adventurous you both are, he responded with a smile.
Are we going someplace, or is the discovery here?
Asked Cindy, glancing at her watch.
Well, I guess the answer is yes to both questions. I'll explain more as we go inside.
They walked up a tiered staircase that led to the house. When they reached a wooden gate, A little boy greeted them. Lars had already set up his camera and was taking establishing shots of the location. He focused in on the boy as he approached.
This is my son, Armando. Say hello, son.
The boy, probably only 10 or 11 years old, was very shy and hid behind his father. He didn't seem to be accustomed to strangers.
Well, hello there, Armando. I'm Cindy. I'm here to report on your dad's discovery,
she said in a very condescending tone.
I know why you're here. Are you trustworthy?
He asked. Cindy was stunned by the question.
Why, I think so,
she said with a giggle, looking back to Lars, who was filming the conversation.
You have to be, if we're going to show you,
he said in a very commanding tone. Cindy could tell this wasn't your everyday fifth grader. Armando ran inside the kitchen, and his father followed, welcoming them inside.
He's a little excited. We rarely have visitors anymore. Oh yeah? Why is that?
asked Lars. Cindy stared back at him with a, hey, I ask the questions here look. Dr. Funderburg smiled as he stood in the doorway.
Everything has changed now. Before, it was just theories, chalkboards, and formulas on paper. Now the discovery exists, and it needs to be kept secret until it is properly documented. That's why you're here. So what is it you've discovered?
He asked again, becoming impatient. Cindy was becoming frustrated by his total disregard for protocol. But Lars was sure this crackpot story was going to be his last, so he was going to have some fun with it. They entered the kitchen.
You'll see, answered the doctor. Did you two have any breakfast yet? We have some coffee, muffins, and bagels, if you're interested.
Oh, that sounds wonderful,
said Cindy. She motioned for Lars to turn off the camera and gave him a look that reminded him who was in charge.
This is my wife, Consuela, and my daughter, Angelica.
The lovely woman of Mexican ancestry, who was Mrs. Funderburg, had a very strong look. She smiled conservatively and offered them breakfast. The little girl, who was about 7, came right up to Cindy.
I've seen you before. On TV.
She said with a big smile. Her newly grown front teeth barely protruded from her jaws.
Are we going to be on TV?
Well, maybe. We brought the camera and sound equipment. Hopefully my editors will find your dad's story newsworthy. Don't worry about that,
said Consuela with a heavy accent.
Come, Angelica. We're going downstairs.
The little girl seemed very enamored with Cindy. Her mother had to pry her away.
Vámonos,
she said as they left. Dr. Funderburg sat at the kitchen table, and his son sat beside him. They appeared almost like a team, like the 10-year-old boy had a stake in this, whatever it was.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for coming. I know it's a little strange to have to keep the story under wraps like this, but I'm sure you'll understand when you see what it is I have to show you. I just want to explain a little bit about why I requested you and how I'd like to conduct the documentary, to keep it scientific and legitimate.
Okay. Is it all right if I ask questions while you explain?
asked Cindy, who took out a pen and small yellow steno pad.
Certainly. I just want to make sure that your report is deemed authentic, beyond any reasonable doubt. I imagine you're using some kind of time of day code for your editing purposes? Yeah, this camera spits out SMPTE. It's burned to bits as I go. Excellent. That's going to be vital to detail our changes in location and the corresponding time. Let's start with this.
The doctor held aloft the front page of the local Albuquerque newspaper.
Can you get a shot of this?
Lars reluctantly got the camera rolling. He focused in on Dr. Funderburk.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Arnold Funderburk. I'm joined today by 2 independent journalists who are documenting my discoveries on gravitational displacement and the operation of my vehicle.
Lars and Cindy looked at each other in disbelief.
Can you focus in on the date on the paper? As you can see, the current time is 10:22 a.m. on Saturday, August 21st, 2003. Good. Now, after you've finished your breakfast, I'll show you my discovery. What vehicle?
Asked Lars in a somewhat sarcastic tone. Well, the doctor paused as he took a sip of coffee and swallowed his bite of food.
The vehicle that's created all the hoopla here locally. You know, the spaceship, the UFO.
Lars laughed out loud and stopped the camera. Cindy interjected. You mean they've mistaken your airplane for a UFO?
Well, I suppose you could call it an airplane. However, its flight is not limited to our atmosphere. Come, enough talk. Let me show you.
As they walked the several hundred yards to the main hangar, Lars was getting increasingly cynical. Armando followed behind him with a look of disdain. Dr. Funderburk was pleased that at least Cindy was prepared to hear his claims and humor his story with her continued presence. Her questions were topical, trying not to anger the doctor. His answers were as general as her questions, because he knew it would take proof, not words, to convince them of his claims. As he stood outside the large building with an enormous, padlocked double door, he motioned for Lars to start shooting again.
It is the culmination of 26 years of personal and collaborative research, and a lifetime of theory and calculation, that I present to you the first man-made interstellar vehicle.
He and Armando opened the gate and revealed the vehicle. It was a large, metallic, cylindrical object that greatly resembled the disc-shaped UFOs of folklore. They entered the hangar, and Lars was filming everything and enjoying it very much. He could not hide his amusement.
Wow! You built this thing yourself?
He asked cynically.
No help from many aliens? Well, considering the reports we have of alien spacecraft and their reported design and flight characteristics, that definitely weighed on my mind while creating the design for this craft. After calculating all the factors involved in traversing space at quantum speeds, I understood why such a shape was not only logical, but feasible.
Cindy gave Lars another stink eye. So are we to understand that this is the UFO or vehicle that has been reported flying around the area?
Yes, our initial flights were totally undetected. But recently, I guess we got a little careless, and someone caught us on videotape. Also, it seems the US military has improved its radar capabilities. We're not as invisible as I once thought.
When you say we, you mean...
My son and I. Armando here is my co-pilot. This is great. I mean, it looks so real,
said Lars, circling the craft with his camera.
This will definitely make the news.
Yes, interjected Cindy once again. It's definitely newsworthy. We'll be sure to show these images to our editors. Perhaps they'll air it. The doctor looked very surprised. Not that they didn't believe him, but that they did not even demand proof of his claims. They were ready to leave, and he hadn't even shown them anything. He pulled a remote control from his pocket and pushed a button.
Don't you want to see the inside?
He said with a smirk as a door with a staircase popped out, like a scene from a sci-fi movie. Tired of his sarcasm, he was now humoring Lars.
Oh, I wouldn't miss it for the world,
said Lars.
Wait, before you get on, let's document your entry onto the craft.
They paused and Lars put the camera back on the doctor.
It is now 10:47 a.m. on August 21st, 2003. I have shown the outside of the vehicle to these independent journalists, who, though no doubt skeptical, are agreeing to board and witness the craft's capabilities.
Cindy was a bit concerned. She pulled Lars aside.
Excuse us for a second, Doctor.
They retreated to a corner of the hangar. Cindy whispered with the force of a scream.
Lars, let's think about this. What if that thing actually flies?
What?
Exclaimed Lars with a laugh.
You can't be serious. He just wants to show us the inside and play some movies on a screen for us to believe we're in outer space. I'd just like to get some shots of the inside. It would be good for the...
Lars! I don't think this is another hoax. I mean, look, it's not even touching the ground.
She pointed to the area beneath the craft. What would most logically be the place for some footings was only empty space.
Well, it must be suspended from the top.
I don't see any cables.
As Lars inspected the roof more closely, he found there were indeed no cables or bars that connected to the top of the disc. He realized that somehow the good doctor's craft appeared to be levitating. He kneeled down and extended his hand towards the bottom of the craft. But before he could reach more than a few feet in, he encountered tremendous counterforce, almost as if the ship was resting on an invisible brick wall.
That's the effect of the electromagnetic pulses that keep the craft aloft. No parlor tricks, just science,
said the doctor, who was himself growing more amused with Lars' suspicions. Lars got up off the ground slowly and then headed back towards Cindy, who was still squatting in a corner of the hangar.
Yeah, I think you're right.
They were both silent for about a minute, unsure what to do next. The doctor approached.
Well, might I suggest we continue the report from the inside? Not to worry, it's totally safe.
Armando was the first to board. By the speed with which he climbed the ladder and found his way inside, he obviously had done this more than once. The two got up slowly and headed towards the platform ladder. Cindy was about to turn around when Armando reached out his hand.
Come on, it's fun,
he said with boyish innocence. They got on board and managed to bring their gear in with them. It was fairly cramped. The circular hallway was narrow and filled with instruments and meters. It provided entry to the cockpit, as well as a kitchenette, a bunk area, and a lavatory. It was all remarkably compact, but at the same time, much larger than it appeared from the outside. Armando led the tour. He started with the first bunk area, immediately to the left of the entry.
This is where Angelica and I sleep while we travel. It's kind of small, but we each have our own bunk.
The circular mini-room was smaller than the size of a walk-in closet. It contained 2 bunks and a whole bunch of toys. Armando then reached next door, which he opened with a push of a button.
This is where you go to the bathroom.
It was a very tight commode, about the size of one you might find in a jet aircraft. In fact, it appeared to be of similar make. The floor was metallic and inverted in the middle where there was a drain, in case someone wanted to take a shower. They crept further down the hallway until they reached the cockpit. It was about the size of a compact car, with plenty of instruments, like a jet might have. Except these were quite different.
I sit here.
He patted the seat to the left of the forward console.
You two will sit here and here, where Mom and Angie usually sit. So the whole family takes weekend trips into space together?
Asked Cindy, trying to hide her growing fear of the unknown.
Yeah, sometimes. When we want to go away to our other home.
Armando stopped and looked up at his father, as if perhaps he had said too much.
Normally, it's just me and Dad.
Dad and I.
His father corrected him. They continued down the circular hall to a pantry and kitchenette, which contained a very compact and well-organized series of movable shelves and drawers.
Are you two still hungry?
He pointed to a selection of different snacks and goodies. There was a microwave oven and a hot and cold water dispenser with a sink.
No thanks. Wow, it's like a Winnebago,
suggested Cindy.
All the comforts of home.
Well, of course, it's safer to travel slower. So when we're all together, we usually spend a few days.
How fast does this thing go?
Cindy asked. There was a bit of a pause, and then the doctor answered.
Well, depending upon the introduction of phase cancellation to the projected gravitational wave, or lack thereof, displacement of even several light years could be instantaneous. The stress on the craft is increased greatly, however.
Now, what do you mean when you say displacement?
I'm glad you asked that question, Ms. Turnauer. It's the crux of the science behind the operation of this vehicle. And it's very important that I explain for the purposes of the documentary. Let's have a seat in the cockpit, and I'll explain as we go.
Where are we going?
Asked Cindy, now more afraid than skeptical.
That's entirely up to you. Why don't you sit here? Lars, have a seat over here.
Dr. Funderburk and his son sat at their respective positions and started a sequence of commands that created some noise. The doctor spoke up.
Gravitational displacement, once just a theory, is now scientific fact, and the means by which a craft of this size and shape can traverse space at quantum speeds that far exceed the speed of light. So, we're all about to go into outer space?
Asked Lars, whose camera work was weakening as his hands became very shaky.
Yes, that's if you wish to come along. Let's do it,
said Lars, still trying to convince himself that they would be laughing about this later in the afternoon. Dr. Funderburk looked to Cindy, who was now speechless. She nodded her head. Lars put the camera on the doctor.
All objects in space have a signature gravitational wave, a gravitational fingerprint, if you will, which denotes their position relative to all other objects in space and their respective fields of gravity.
He picked up a rubber ball that Armando had left on his seat.
Gravity attracts objects of lesser mass, and in so doing, corrects their position in space.
He dropped the ball, which fell to the floor and bounced until it rolled to a stop.
It is not propelled, but rather its gravitational position is corrected to correlate to its natural state. Likewise, this craft, utilizing the energy of the interior particle accelerator, can emit a focused gravitational wave which is actually inconsistent with its true position in space and time. Thereby, the spatial bodies which we have targeted with the incorrect wave are what we harness to correct our position in space. The tremendous fields of gravity created by the enormous mass of planets and stars attract the craft to the natural state that we've projected into space. As I'm sure you can imagine, it's tremendously difficult to confirm your calculations when dealing with the unknown, particularly uncharted space. Therefore, we've mostly stayed in our own backyard.
Mostly? What do you consider our, backyard?
asked Cindy. Our own solar system, answered the doctor, quite matter-of-factly.
So what you're saying is, you've basically already gone where no man has gone before?
Asked Lars, who was growing increasingly skeptical of the wild claims being made.
How is it that you've individually surpassed the science of the rest of mankind?
Well, I suppose before there were fleets of ships traversing the seas, one man, somewhere, had to be the first to carve out a canoe.
We're ready, Dad,
said Armando, who appeared excited to show off his navigational expertise. Sound emanated from within the center of the craft. Whirling, opposing cycles grew in intensity and speed. Excellent. With your permission, I'd like to welcome you on a voyage unlike any you've been on before. He looked into the camera again. We are now about to embark on the first ever media-recorded expedition of this craft. All earlier trials were done in secret to protect the sovereignty and peaceful use of the project. We now present to the rest of humanity the science of gravitational displacement for use in space exploration.
Lars,
Cindy whispered as she motioned for him to come closer. He stopped the camera and leaned over towards her.
are you sure we should do this?
Sen, I'm telling you, the rest of the ride is make-believe. There's no way this thing is gonna leave the ground.
But what if it's true, and we're about to go into space?
Sin, hello? Reality calling? Are you there? We're not going into space, okay? Let's just see what he wants to show us. But hey, you were right. This is good stuff.
Lars and Cindy returned their attention to the cockpit. Dr. Funderburk and his son sat patiently, waiting for their deliberations to end.
All right, let's see what this thing can do,
said Lars confidently. Very well then. Buckle up, responded the doctor. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. If you haven't yet, please subscribe and ring the bell for notifications so you never miss an episode. Be sure to smash that like button and comment below. It helps a lot. If you'd like to help me get this book published, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. And as always, be sure to share this story with all of your friends on your favorite social media.